So, Doug, take it away. What do you have for us?
So, great opportunity for me because I obviously am not the legal side of small businesses, and I have the, I guess, luck or advantage of looking kind of at the idea and dream side of a small business. Now, I didn't get into coaching because I always wanted to, although that's where my talents are. So I ended up in the right place. A lot of people either get stuck in a position where they have to work outside of a W-2 environment, I guess, pick something else, pick something they like to do, and others can kind of work with it. Others can sort of, they have an idea they've always wanted to do, they're creative or something else.
So how do you outline something for someone who now, let's say they have the idea.
Right.
So they've either talked to JoanAlys or it's just an epiphany they've had.
Right.
What are some first steps? What are some takeaways that you can give the listening audience as far as from a business coach's perspective to help someone get organized?
Okay, don't wait and play the school of hard knocks is my first piece of advice, which is what a lot of people would do. And if that's the advice they would probably get from an uncle or somebody else in small business, which is I did it, you can do it that way. So I would talk to a person who does this, a coach or JoanAlys or whoever. Secondly, I would think about the financial runway as part of it. Most of the people that I've talked to don't have a notion that you need some amount of capital from some place or something you've kept yourself to build a business. And I would always double that amount, despite the fact that most of us get very excited and we'll dive into something. The reality of having a small business and watching it potentially fail when you're very close to success is very painful.
Okay, so don't start off with a school of hard knocks.
Right.
So in other words, do something by design.
Right.
Number two, have your funding aligned.
Right.
And think beyond the scope of just what the initial costs are going to be. So let's say potentially reserves.
Right.
Okay, and then what?
Okay, so the other thing I would do actually is there's the idea side and there's the revenue generation side. And it's almost like what I call the short-term business plan and the long-term business plan. We all have this notion that we're going to go someplace over a really long time. You have to have something that's actionable, which is a daily, what do I do every day to build this business over a week, a month, and 6 months? Most of the people that I meet that get advice, they say, well, I build a website. I've got to do this. And my question to them is, what revenue, what are you doing now that will generate revenue as quickly as you can? So how does that particularly generate revenue? Well, I talked to a person who said it would do this. Okay, that's fine.
Ricky, you have any thoughts on that? Because that's like right up your camp.
I'm sorry, Paul. Would you ask me?
I'm just saying, do you have any thoughts on what Doug was saying? Because just a quick recap. Did you hear what he was saying?
Yeah, I heard what he said. I just didn't hear your last little part. But I think that's great advice, Doug. People get so stressed out and they put a lot of money, into kind of some of that beginning marketing without realizing, it takes a little time.
Right.
And the cash infusion is what my friend calls it. She calls it a quick cash infusion. And I love what Doug's talking about, focusing on bringing in and getting some revenue up and running for you so you can sustain yourself while you build your marketing.
Right.
It's great advice, Doug.
Yeah, so there's what was the quote? Most businesses fail on the 1 yard line, and I always remember that because as I go through my build up, people always ask me, how am I doing? And I said, I love my job. It's growing gradually, but I'm not going to tell you what I'm making per se because it's a long ramp. And my business will succeed at some point, but it won't succeed in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It's probably going to take a lot longer. And that's hard for people to fathom. You have to sit down and really look at what's going to happen, the planning portion, what you just said. What's going to happen over the next 6 months? How poor could I be to make this happen?
So be intentional about it as opposed to...
Be very intentional. And some of the things that I've run into, there's a lot of law of attraction talking, and the intention is, as long as I really want it, it'll happen. I'm going to say that's 90% of it, but the act of actually knowing what you have to do action-wise, how to actually implement it, is just as critical. So, daily action, monthly action.
And if I can chime in,
please.
This is Adrian. We have a small company. It's First Capital Funding. We're a private lender. We're extremely busy right now because the banks just aren't lending. And one thing we get often caught up in is trying to close the larger loans, the $1 million to $3 million loans. and those just take time.
Right.
As time goes by, we still have to pay for everything for the office every single day.
Exactly.
So we regroup and we find the real doable loans, the small ones. They're not going to make a huge dent, but if you can do 10 of them, by the time you close the big loan, it gets you from point A to B. And that we often struggle with that because the big carrot is the large one.
Sure.
That what can I bring in the most money? When if you chip away at it and you bring in revenue, because that's the key. If you're stressed about that, your passion can't come out.
Absolutely.
And you know what's interesting is where you have such an extensive portfolio background. You know, when you're going after that one big hit, you were telling us a story yesterday when in your office actually about that one fellow that, you know, what was the worst case scenario? He was still going to make money, but his ego got in the way and he held out and he ended up losing his shirt.
That's right.
You know, bottom line is that, you know, you're making money along the way, but in the same token, if you take a hit, it's a small hit as opposed to all or nothing. It does not have to be a zero-sum game.
You're exactly right.
JoanAlys, I'm kind of curious. I mean, Doug and Adrian are giving us some really good stuff right here. And at this point, I wish this could be a 2-hour show instead of a 1-hour show. But I think most people probably come to you once they have the idea to a degree, with the exception of that one gentleman. And then that's fantastic. It let our mind kind of free flow. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we also have to make sure that we're doing it right and we don't get ourselves into trouble.
Right. And often they come too late, because I think what Doug and Adrian are saying is also true in law, that by the inch, it's a cinch. And very often I see clients who think they need a profit-sharing plan and a very complicated structure, when it's very easy to start out with a very simple structure that will still appeal to lenders and will still satisfy the basic need to set up an entity, and you can roll it up later into the idea that you can franchise and list on a stock exchange and have with the Fortune 500 or whatever you would like to believe your goal is down the road.
It's amazing the way people have this mentality, a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
They figure, no, I want to be merchandised already. Like, I'm going to position myself for acquisition, you know, and I'm going to hit, you know, I'm going to swing for the fences from day one, when you can just start out very simply, is what I'm hearing you say.
They visit with me when they've already traded their name. They have a great name. Unfortunately, it's the kind of name that everyone else has too. And were there to be some catastrophe associated with this name across the front page of the paper, you know, with the other entity, you know, ABC company kills thousands. Of course, it's going to negatively reflect on their wonderful ABC product, but they never considered that. They're already in the marketplace with their name associated with their product. They've begun marketing, and they didn't do the simple thing of figuring out whether they had a strong mark in their marketplace.
So people usually come to you, they're being reactive as opposed to being proactive.
They're already doing something, and but what they haven't done is planned just the simple stuff. At the very, very beginning, they think they need a very sophisticated marketing plan, something they found on their Word template somewhere in WordPerfect 2007. And that may have been old school. That's what your banker needed for a line of credit 20 years ago. Today, it's just a thought process. You put the plan together. What do you think it's going to take? How much is it going to cost? What are going to be your cash needs? And then very often you throw the plan away, because as you hit the door, everything changes.
And for those listening, you're listening to JoanAlys from Smith & Associates?
Correct.
And how do people get a hold of you, by the way?
We have an office in Austin. I'm Law Offices, JBS.com.
Law Offices, JBS.com?
Yes, and you can see our website there.
Fantastic.
What I'm taking is keep it simple, right?
Well, I mean, I'm just aching to, again, I need to calm myself here, because you hit so perfectly on the notion of a business plan, which is, I've thought out this great thing, and I always say, find an expert to pick it apart for you. It's a painful process, but, you know, if you lose a little bit of steam, you get some reality, which is, why do you need a very complex business plan when does it help you get out of bed and do something specific? And most people say no, but I'm looking farther down the road, and I'm saying, I'm going to take you back a step or two, and yes, have that in the back of your head, but you've got to know what you're doing today. and in a month to succeed. You know, you're not going to be great because you have an idea. You're going to be great because you implement and you act correctly. You're going to be in the trenches. And it's a much more of a trench game than people with great ideas believe.
That's right.